So our goal was to test if these bikes were ready to race, as it says on the KTM. Now, I think I did a pretty good job at that, riding over 300 miles on this and over 100 miles on the 1290. So now is time to hand over this bike to this man to see if it is, yeah, on everyday use. What are you saying?
How was 24 hours of punishment?
Do you know what? It was fun. Now I finished. At the time, it was brutal. I did enjoy it. I really did.
Can I ask a personal question?
Can I ask a personal
How's
question?
your body?
It was all right.
Is it?
Yeah.
Blisters?
I think, did I mention I did Dakar, and that set me in good stead for 24 hours. Hands have recovered. Yeah, a few blisters, but yeah, I enjoyed it. Well, now I finished.
I'm not gonna ride it
and
for
forgot
24
about
hours
it
straight. I'm probably gonna ride it for a few hours and then stop and have a coffee, and I'm gonna take a more leisurely approach to my adventure bike testing. You've obviously given it a glowing review of its off-road performance, Neil, so I'm gonna go and hit a few trails, hit a few nice roads, and do a more normal style of.
Well, I'm gonna swap with you now. I'll drive the van, you get on the bike, and I'll see you somewhere nice.
So where adventure bikes quite often feel like they're trying to be more and more practical, more and more road bias, more and more touring, KTM and probably notably Yamaha as well have bucked that trend. And this new version of KTM's extreme adventure bike, the 890R, is taking that to another level. The 790R was an awesome bike. I really enjoyed riding it. I had a few little hang-ups that I wouldn't say there were things wrong with it, but things that I felt would be nicer, would be better. I wasn't always so sure with the ride-by-wire, quite what I was going to get. It could have done with, a bit more bottom end for the trialsy type trails, but really that was kind of as far as my complaints went. It was a revvy, buzzy, angry little adventure bike that worked better off-road than most other stuff when it came out. As with kind of all good manufacturers of bikes and all great models, it's the evolution that starts to really make a bike special. These days that gets harder and harder with ever more stringent emissions regulations, but what KTM has done with this is they've taken the 790R, which was a fantastic off-road biased adventure bike, and subtly improved it everywhere. They might not look totally different when you park them next to each other, but again, lots of subtle changes that have made the overall package, I'm going to say, a good jump better. Now when you read through KTM spec sheets for these 890Rs, they have done so much. It's everything has had a look at. Smaller subframe, they've changed the airbox, made the seat narrower across the middle, they've tweaked the frame itself, they've tweaked the suspension, they've addressed some of the issues there were with brakes front and rear, modified the rear brake hose, again responding to stuff that owners have found wrong in the field. On top of that, they've put the new 890 motor in, which has given us more power, more torque. They've put a heavier crank in it to give it more inertia, which means, in real words, means it's a little bit harder to stall and has a little bit more grunt, a bit more shove low down. It's not transformed the bike into a different bike, but it's taken everything I loved about the 790 and just stepped the game up a little. Now Neil went all out really to prove the credentials of this bike off-road. He gave it a proper hammering around the dawn to dust. The fact that it did a lap, huge testament to it. The fact that it went on alongside the 1290 Neil was riding to win that event for the solo rider for the 24 hour. I mean, that's insane that you can do that on an adventure bike. And it kind of points out the fact that these things are trying more and more to be comfortable, long-range enduro bikes, rather than a touring bike with a bit of off-road capability. I didn't need to replicate that. Neil's completely blown away anything I was thinking of doing off-road with the KTM. But what I did do is take it through some nice, tight, nadgery stuff, the sort of slower, trialsy off-road things. And what that highlights with the bike is how easy it is to ride at a slow speed, what the clutch response is like, what the throttle response is like in that sort of real low down feeling for traction situation, what it's like to get your feet down in a sudden panic and emergency. And those things I think are really indicative of how easy this bike is to ride off-road for someone who isn't so confident. When you're And Neil, riding flat out, you can ride anything anywhere. He's annoyingly sat behind the camera, so I'm having to be nice to his face, which is destroying me. But Neil can ride anything anywhere. Neil's got a very good feel for what a bike can and can't do though. And to echo his comments on that, I found that going slowly on this, it's actually very impressive.
It's quite impressive.
Talked before about older KTMs always being a bit snappy, a bit too angry. And if you were a bit nervous off-road, they're too much. This thing, I think it's a big improvement. Some areas that you might struggle as a shorter or more nervous off-road rider, I found that while stationary, I could get my feet down very easily. The new slimmer seat and narrower tank area kind of let you get your feet down. The seat widens quite quickly behind there. So if your foot's not going straight down, it's trying to take a dab slightly backwards, suddenly the seat's a little bit awkward and you can't get your foot down. I'm surprised KTM didn't make that seat a little bit narrower further back for this R version. But again, I think they're always dancing that balance of keeping enough cushion there for comfort and then slimming it down at the front. But I found a couple of times I was struggling to get my foot past the seat. It has incredible ground clearance. A few times I got slightly excited and launched it off of banks and big flat drops, and every time I expected it to clatter into the floor with a bang, and it didn't. It just sort of landed, the suspension absorbed it, and I carried on. I was very impressed from that front. I did find that if I had it in rally mode on the rally throttle response, in the tight, slippery wood sections, it was just that bit too aggressive. So I moved it back down to street throttle response, which, keeping the rest of the rally settings, let me find a bit more grip and have a little bit more confidence when I was on a slippery off camber. On the road, that's where this bike is an absolute riot. Everything that's great about things like the 890 Duke R, you just get a big, wide-barred, knobbly version of it with this bike. It's still got that want to rev, that want to be thrashed, jumps, wheelies, skids on bumpy, jumpy roads. It's brilliant fun for. With the knobbly tyres on as well, you can't help yourself but test the traction control, and you end up leaving black lines out of every corner with a huge smile on your face. Where it has grown up a little over the 790 is now it will cruise at constant speed a little bit more smoothly. It's not always hunting and chomping at the bit. And likewise, you can run a little bit lower down in the revs and it's got some more go, some more kind of oomph off the bottom compared to the old bike, which lets you be a bit lazier with the gears and still make progress. If I can caveat that by saying, compared to the 1290, it's still a far more frantic bike. Now, if you rode the 1290 and this flat out, wide open throttle as hard as you could, absolutely 1290 is way crazier. But on that kind of normal road riding style where you're just flowing, making good progress, enjoying your ride, you're always a little bit busier on this bike. You're always a bit more aggressive on the gears, having to drive it a little bit harder, rev it a little bit more to make the same progress. It's not a good or a bad thing, but for sure it's down to your style of riding. On this, I found myself a bit more brappy, a bit more revvy, hitting the brakes, driving out of corners. Whereas on the 1290, when I'd finished being an idiot, it was quite nice to just cruise along and maintain a sort of steady pace with a quarter of the effort that I would be putting in on this. I think this is probably the easiest KTM adventure bike to ride off-road. They've improved that over the 790R, and it's getting easier and easier each time they evolve the bike. Neil, I think, has proven beyond doubt that the Ready to Race thing is really actually more than a marketing slogan. He took it to a race, raced it, it still worked at the end of it, and he did bloody well. Possibly that's biased because of who was riding it. But more than just a race bike, this thing's an awesome fun tool on the road. It's still a sporty bike. It's not a cruisy soft tourer. This thing is what we all used to think was a sports bike. It's that sort of performance wrapped up with knobbly tyres and big handlebars. At 12 grand, in adventure bike world, the Adventure R's not badly priced. One thing I do struggle with though is weight increase. It sounds stupid, but if anyone's followed my unfinished project, I was obsessed with dropping the weight out of that bike. The 790R, KTM released at 189 kilos dry, claimed at 203 kilos wet. This bike's gained 7 kilos over that. Whether that's 7 kilos and they were a bit cheeky with their figures when they claimed them on the last one, or whether it is a real world 7 kilos, it is a shame that despite the increase in power, which is good, we've also increased the weight. Did that make it better to ride or worse to ride? Well, now I know about it, my head's thinking, yeah, it definitely makes it worse. I did struggle in a few places on awkward off cameras at low speed. I put it down to the shape of the seat, sort of making my foot position a little awkward, but hey, maybe that 7 kilos was making me find it a bit more hard off-road. I certainly remember the first time I rode the 790, I was blown away how easy it was everywhere. This, quite blown away, but maybe it's just taking the edge off. Is the extra power worth that weight? In everywhere but the most technical, awkward, stop-start off-road situations, I'm probably going to say yes. The bike is now less zingy, less revvy, smoother and easier to ride in a normal road riding situation. And I actually found it a lot easier to slide around off-road too. So yeah, I'm going to say I'm gutted about the weight increase, but it's probably worth it. Have a crack on an 890R, and it's a really good way to start getting into off-road and a bit of trail riding.
Audio Jungle.